managed to stumble across this video. You likely came to it through Vince Venturella's topic of the week about attracting new blood into Warhammer, either Warhammer or war games in general. I'm going to start off at least going at this at a perspective of towards the Age of Sigmar community, because I think most of us came from the background of Warhammer 8th edition, where we played with these gigantic armies, and then our community didn't grow, and at some point that's what led to us going to this Age of Sigmar in the beginning. And for me, this perspective came up because I'm a person that likes the smaller sized battles. And there was a topic on the Grand Alliance community that came up that said, what should our points limit be for new battles? And the first three or four people who answered were, let's make it 2,000 points. And I have to vehemently disagree with this. And the reason for that is because if we go back to what our old problem was, is that if you look at a primer of, okay, how do I get into Warhammer as a hobby? Well, it was, you got to buy all this stuff, you got to read all this stuff, you got to put time and effort into building said stuff, and then you may not even get a fruitful experience out of it. So my thought on it was start with 1,000 points and not 2,000 or 2,500, because it cuts back on how much time and money we have to actually spend in building our army in the first place. And it's not a, hey, we need to not go above 1,000 points. It's more of, we need to start, or we need to allow entry-level thing and make 1,000 points an actual item of contention. Because if we're going around, nobody new is going to want to play this game if they have to do this much effort to even get into the game in the first place. A second thing I see from kind of a new player perspective, and this is something more on Games Workshop, but I think it's something that the community can help build into, is if I wanted to start off with a brand new army, say Sylvaneth or Stormcast or Seraphon, or let's go with something else like the Darkling Covens. I don't know how to get, or I don't know anything about this army right now. If I go to the Games Workshop website, I can pull up a few of these figures, and it may give me a little intro blurb, but I don't know anything about the race or the race or the faction itself as a whole. So I think it'd be good for the community or for the online community to start by saying, well, here's how here's what they are, here's why they're fighting, and here's what they work for. And a lot of this may go back to Games Workshop because they haven't actually filled any of that fluff out. But I mean, a lot of us already know where we're going for Warhammer 40k, what army we might like for War Machine or Hordes, or what army we might like for Infinity. But we don't know that for Age of Sigmar, and that's kind of where we need to go from there. Third point's going to be two separate points. It's communication and how we express ourselves towards new players. There's two ways to do it. There is we can be complete jerks, and we can be complete nice guys and not telling, or be friends with everybody. The problem with being friends with everybody is that we're willing to say, oh, you can use this crappy model and it will look okay. And that you shouldn't tell a player that, hey, you need to go ahead and buy, or buying this crappy model is okay. Sometimes it's better to tell them, on the other hand, hey, this model is not going to be as effective as you think it's going to be. On the other hand, being a complete jackass may scare them off of the game in the very first place, and then you're not getting a new person into the community, and you're not getting somebody else new to play against. Fourth, advice for new players is to go down to your local store. If you don't have a friend that will join you on this war game, go down to your local store or local gaming shop. See who's there, see what games they're playing, ask the store manager if you have to, hey, what do people play around here? And get into that game first. It may not be your first choice as far as war games go, but having somebody to play with, having to learn the game, just for the little bit of fantasy I learned and tried out the first time I tried, that kind of got me into war, or I understood the game enough to get into Warhammer 40k, understood it enough to get into War Machine and Hordes from there. It at least helps build a foundation of, okay, what are we actually doing here? What are we trying to do? But if you don't have anybody to play against, that may be a worse sign of things, or it's a very bad sign of things to come for playing Wargaming. And number 5, and this applies more to the smaller game or the smaller areas, is you have to go to a store and be there for a certain amount of time, and you may have to sit there and do nothing, just waiting on somebody else to show up who may play with you. If anything has killed a community, it's that nobody is there to participate in said community. And you sometimes get something along the lines of you're at the store with a bunch of people. There may be a group playing Dungeons and Dragons. There's probably a group playing Magic the Gathering. And you've got your Warhammer, or you don't have your Warhammer Fantasy Army because you came up showed up to do one of those things, or they didn't bring their army because they showed up to do one of those things, but they'd be highly interested in it, and they might show up again if you were there present every Saturday or every Friday doing that. And that's not very easy to say because, hey, sometimes we'll arrange a group meeting and then our suited opponent will be the social introvert like we usually are and won't show up at all, and you're like, well, I'm glad I waited for 3 hours for somebody who isn't showing up. And that can be highly detrimental to our hobby. So it's good for us to set a time or set a scheduled time that we will show up at a certain place, be there, be ready for any opponent that comes in, and if not, we may have to play something else like Warhammer 40K for a little while or something. 2 more final bits I'll go through. The first is that if you live in a major metropolitan area and have host at least one major event a year, you need to host a second one. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It doesn't have to be anything great. But the community comes to these events because we like to go to them. And sometimes it doesn't fit into our schedule, or it's too far away, or it's not all that important. And I guess it's not that you need to have a second event. It's that you need to or that other locales need to have new events. So I live in a kind of the middle of nowhere. The nearest town to us that has over 250,000 people is 2 hours away. The nearest town that has at least 1 million people is 4.5 hours away. And our local area has about 250,000 people, even though it's divided amongst 2 different cities. But we don't have kind of this, or none of the places have the space for a major tournament or anything. I don't even think I think the last time we had anybody had a major tournament, I think 4 people showed up in total. It may have been a bad weekend, but like that's what we would expect from said area. So if you live in one of these metropolitan areas where it only takes 2 hours to get entirely across town, you need to be having these events on. Maybe you may have one on a weekly basis for your own little area, but you want to have something that says, hey, we want everybody to show up, or we want as many people as we can to show up on a quarterly or half-yearly basis or whatnot. And that gives us the opportunity of those of us that live in the middle of nowhere to come out to you guys and visit and talk with everybody. The second thing goes back to my very first point, is you need, or we keep talking about the need for new players because all the old players are leaving. And you got to have something that the new players are going to be able to access to. And I did a calculation on what's the cheapest death army cheapest Age of Sigmar death army you can build that gets to 2,500 points. And I'm entirely certain it's Nagash, 2 of the start collecting boxes, and a box of 20 zombies or 20 crypt ghouls, whatever you want to go with. That entire thing ends up being a 2,500 point army, but it's still somewhere upwards of $300. When you get to 1,000 points, it gets down to about $120, which then you can say, well, I can probably put in that investment and get what I want out of it. So we need to start catering, or as a community, start catering to people who want to play smaller and smaller smaller events, because it also gets in the new people, and it gets in the old, or it may get in a few of the older people that may just want to have a little bit of fun. So I think I've said my piece. I'm going to go ahead and spring it off to whoever else wants to comment.